Hi, Audible listeners. I'm your Audible Live host, Michelle Collins, and I am over the moon to be here today with John Lithgow to chat about The Guilty. It's a new Audible original by James Patterson. John narrates alongside an amazing cast, including Bryce Dallas Howard, Peter Gallagher, Aldous Hodge, Corey Stoll, and more. So, first of all, thank you, John, so much for taking the time to join us. And let me start off by asking you to give us just a quick synopsis of The Guilty for those who haven't had the pleasure of listening yet.
Sure, Michelle, but first let me tell you how great it is to meet you, and thank you for having me on. It's
Thank you.
great fun to talk about The Guilty because it's great fun to listen to it. The audio producers did all these miraculous things to create these actually three environments: the dressing room, the onstage performance, and the audience rustling and laughing and shrieking in terror. Uh, they've just created this amazing immersive audio experience. Now, how's that for a teaser?
Well, listen, you can't tease me because I listened to it. So I'm spoiled. I've listened to the whole thing. Can I just also add that judging by the amount of books behind you, you are by far the most educated celebrity I've ever talked to in my life. I didn't know they bought so many books.
Listen, I have to tell you, I'm in my wife's
Uh,
office. She's
that
a
explains
she's
it.
a history professor, and those are all her books. I don't understand a word she says, nor anything in any of her books. But
I
so
was
that's
like, we're
pure,
impressed. Yeah.
like my entire life, that's pure fraud.
That's hysterical and a beautiful printer as well. I just like to note the you know, background. Now we can talk more about The Guilty. There are so many themes in this that I think kind of reflect modern day society when it comes to the gossip columns and how we read tabloids and just how us as consumers and as lovers of pop culture think we actually know these celebrities, right? Like as though they're our friends. I'm
Mhm.
wondering because you've been acting for such a long time, and so genius. Has it changed as you've been in the business? Like, do you feel now that there's this different pressure on celebrities to reveal more about their lives than when you were first starting out?
Well, that's a really interesting question to lead with. I think in general things are more similar than different.
Mm.
Yes, they've been just sort of exploded by social media and the fact that people are obsessed with the private lives of very public people. But that's always been the case. It's just that it's a lot more accessible now than it's ever been. The interesting thing about The Guilty, as I said, it is a kind of throwback. It's an old time mode. It's about theater, and it's about a kind of mythical theater world, which more resembles old time theater in New York than modern theater. When a sort of very theatrical and charismatic director, producer, writer, this auteur, has become a kind of rock star celebrity. Doesn't quite have, I guess Lin Manuel Miranda is the closest you can get
Oh
to it
yeah.
nowadays. But everybody in the audience is gathered because they're absolutely obsessed with this man. And is what is he going to spring on us this time? In a sense, that happens more in the world of sort of rock music
Right.
and movies than it does in theater. But that's what's so wonderful about this. It's an old time mode and it's a kind of old time model.
As I was listening to it, though, I was really impressed. And obviously, James Patterson. Have I ever been to an airport where I haven't bought a James Patterson book? No, I haven't. John Lithgow. But, very successful guy for a reason. But every episode had so many twists where just when you think you figured out where it's headed, the stakes somehow get raised every episode. So when you got this script, you must have been very excited to go along for the ride for the very first time. Was recording it? I mean, tell us about that experience of kind of reading it for the first time, I guess.
Sure. Yes, it was a very exciting prospect. Uh, I'm sure it was an exciting prospect for James when Audible, I assume that they approached him and said, "Will you create radio theater for us in your in the mode of a great James Patterson murder mystery?" I'm sure it was his idea to set it in a theater and make it so very theatrical. but I
Mm.
think he must have. I still have never met the man nor
Really?
talked to him about this project. And I would love to. But I imagine he was just very excited. It was kind of a creative rush. He's an incredibly prolific man, but I'm not sure he's been asked to do anything quite like this. And he must have just loved the challenge. And of course, I felt the same way reading it, just the way you do when you read an exciting script and you know, wow, this is going to have a brand new kind of impact on people.
No, and you
As
feel it.
far as
It's amazing.
the
Yeah.
process, because you also asked me about that, it was great fun. I mean, in my day, I've done a lot of radio stuff, way back to New York in the early 1970s, before I could land a single New York acting job. I had a part-time job on WBAI radio doing radio drama. We used to put on plays, and we used to put on radio satirical, political satire with all sorts of crazy sound effects. And over the years I've done a lot with just sound and no visual. So it was wonderful to be invited back into it. Audible has sort of created this new excitement around just listening to things. I suppose it has a lot to do with so much great audio technology and the
Mm.
fact that people listen to stories in cars and while they're while they're doing work that doesn't require any thought. But also, earbuds and AirPods, they've just changed everything. People are listening all the time to podcasts and to Audible. I myself have
Everything.
recorded about 3 or 4 things for Audible. So it was
You're
just
I
great
mean,
to be
you're in the
invited back in.
mix. Yeah, no, they
Huh?
love you. This is not your first Audible project. They keep calling you back, and I think the reason you said it yourself, just having had so much voice experience, you have one of the most unique voices I think in the business. And even as I was listening to The Guilty, I just kept thinking I can't stop picturing Lord Farquaad doing the play. Like the entire time, because I'm a real Shrek head, John, I must tell you. And I said this could be one of your many characters. It messes with your brain a little bit because your voice is so ubiquitous.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid it's a
Yeah.
bit too ubiquitous. People have heard an awful lot of my voice, but it's also why they probably came to me to play this part. I mean,
Yeah.
he, my great failing is excess. I come from theater. I grew up doing theater. I come from a theater family, and my
Mm.
father produced outdoor Shakespeare, which is
Wow.
you have to simply yell all your lines. Well, I've been yelling my whole career. So I'm an over the top actor, no question about it. I wish I had a nickel for every time a director has told me to just take it down a little, John. So
But you know,
I was
yeah.
the perfect Osmond Box. That's
You
my
it
character.
really is true. I mean, and it also makes me laugh. Just every character you inhabit, including Osmond Box and in on Dexter, which I say best Dexter season. You didn't hear it from me. Your turn on Dexter. Just there is always a humor with you, even when you're playing like a maniacal killer, both on, in this thing. And you really have an underlying kind of wink at the audience energy. And I'm just wondering, are you aware of that? Like, do you know that that's happening? Is it just your general persona, the Lithgowiness of it all? Or is that something that you kind of try to bring to every part a little bit?
Well, I certainly do love acting. To me, you have to take acting very seriously, but you will also have to completely enjoy it. Uh, so, and when it's good, I enjoy it the most. When it's great writing, when it's a great idea, when you're performing a kind of magic trick for the audience, you're giving them a real treat. There's really nothing more fun than that. And I think the twinkle that you talk about is that sort of secret thrill that I have in performing for an audience. And as I say, I keep referring back to my theater roots in doing this show, in doing The Guilty. This man Osmond Box is in a play in front of an audience, And even though I was all alone in a recording studio with just a sound engineer, it was easy to imagine being in front of that crowd. Uh, and and that's the secret thrill that you detect even when I'm playing it, the Trinity Killer.
Genuinely, you just I always laugh even when you're killing people. I'm like, that John Lithgow is a comedic genius. You're just funny. I mean, you can't help it. Another question I have for you. Obviously, you are a Tony Award winning actor. You're only 2 letters away from EGOTing, isn't that right? You need a Grammy and an Oscar, and you'll be
Yeah.
there.
Yes, I sulk about that all the time.
Oh, I also would. On your behalf, frankly. I think about it every day. Um, but do you think that I feel like this project, The Guilty, could be turned into an actual play, like a
Oh,
obviously
absolutely.
condensed, but it would be
Yeah.
so brilliant as an audience member to be kind of one of the characters really in this show.
Yeah.
Is that something that's being discussed at all?
I don't know whether anybody else has talked about it, but me and my sound engineer certainly talked about it, and our
Yeah.
directors on Zoom. Uh, just this is such a great theater vehicle. It's just bends reality, bends and twists reality, just the way that plot bends and twists. And I think it probably is really stage worthy. If somebody like Ivo Van Hove took it over,
Wow.
the man who's doing all this sort of groundbreaking stuff on Broadway these days, he would
Yeah.
have a blast with this. He's the man who directed the stage version, the recent stage version of West Side Story
Mm.
and uh, Network with Bryan Cranston.
Oh,
He would
brilliant.
have a ball with this. He would have as much fun with this as the Audible sound engineers did.
Uh, you mentioned how you're in the booth, and I don't know if people realize when you're recording these Audible shows that it is very old fashioned, as you mentioned, where you sometimes do get to work with some of the other actors. Was all the recording done separately, or did you bring in, for example, like a Bryce Dallas Howard, anyone else into the booth with you?
Nope, nobody but me. Me and the sound
Wow,
engineer were the only
crazy.
human beings. On the Zoom, we had the director and we had a wonderful actress. The director was in upstate New York. The actress was in Chicago. I was in LA in a sound studio, and the sound engineer was behind the mixing board.
Mm.
The actress fed me all my lines. So she worked even harder than I did for those 4 days. And they immediately told me all these people they'd cast. I hadn't known that Bryce was involved, and
Oh
two
my God.
really, really good friends of mine, Peter Gallagher and Danny Burstein, both of whom I've worked with, and like among my very favorite actors. I was so thrilled to learn that they'd already recorded their parts. And Julie White, another actor I've always wanted to work with, and Corey Stoll, I think the world of
Oh,
him,
love
and
him.
this great guy Aldous Hodge, who plays the young star in the play. So here I was acting with this fabulous cast, but kind of wistfully all alone in a
Yeah.
sound booth.
I have
I'm
a
used to it though.
question. Oh, go
I
on.
mean, like
Yeah.
for example, when I recorded Lord Farquaad, I was all alone. I met
That's
Eddie
so
Murphy
sad.
for the first time on opening night about 3 years later. At
No,
the
that's so funny. Oh my gosh. And of course, it
yeah,
always, by the way, just to bring Shrek up again, because John, you have no idea the impact it's made on my life, that they picked one of the tallest actors in Hollywood to play the littlest animated character. I mean, Tom Cruise had to be furious. Like, I can only imagine. Short
I
actors are like, this is my chance.
I think that's why they cast me. They thought it was such a good basic joke for the entire role. With the hell with the
Oh, Lord.
voice, it's just the fact that I was tall and he was small.
Oh,
I had
it's
all
just brilliant.
until
Mm.
until that day, interviewers would occasionally fawningly ask me, "Is there anything you can't play? Any part you can't play?" I always said, "Well, I've never been short." Well, now I've just played Lord Farquaad, so I can't use that line anymore.
Listen, there's an opening for a new dwarf, John
Yeah,
Lithgow. So if you can just, sneakers on the knees, and there is time
yes.
for you to play that part.
And
I want
and
to
I
ask you a
did play.
question. Go on.
Well, I did play the very small Winston Churchill, and Roger Ailes in quick succession. They were both 5'7" and I'm 6'4". So
And by the way, I was going to say that your prosthetics in both of those, in The Crown and Bombshell, were shocking. Like almost, you were unrecognizable. Is that what happens? Do you take that home at the end of the day, like for Halloween? Are you like, I'll take the schnoz, I'll take the cheeks, the jowls? How does it work?
well, in the case of, it's very interesting. You should bring up the prosthetics with those
Yeah.
two looks, because the prosthetics for Churchill were non-existent. All that, or rather, they were inside rather than outside. I had little plumpers in my cheeks like this, and I stuffed cotton up my nose. That was it. Whereas Roger Ailes, we spent 2.5 hours doing layers and layers of this extraordinary silicone stuff, but it was disposable. You know, when they peeled it off at the end of the day, they just threw it away and put on a fresh set the next morning.
I'm telling you, West Hollywood was out of foam latex when you were shooting the Roger Ailes project. Can I get a handful of foam latex? Couldn't find it. We have a very special surprise. And John, I know that you are aware of this, but for people watching at home or wherever you are, we actually have another one of the cast members from The Guilty who you were just raving about before. Arguably my favorite face after yours to see and listen to, the wonderful Peter Gallagher, a surprise guest. Let's welcome him into the room. Peter Gallagher. Hi.
Peter, come on, Peter, join us.
There he is. Hi, Peter.
They intended you to be a surprise, but I got a little peek during the sound check. So it's fantastic to see you. Yes, right.
I could have watched the two of you waving at each other for the next 20 minutes. I don't even want to ask any questions. I'm like, just wave. The people just want to see you connect. That's it.
Well, I'm a little out of breath because I've been running around to my neighbors collecting books so I could put them in the shelf behind me. Just
you did a good job.
Try to at least, measure up to John's wife's.
I'm like completely illiterate, and I'm not afraid to say it on a live Skype.
Believe me, there are people out there who read. Go to the neighbors. That's what I did.
That's hilarious. Peter Gallagher, thank you so much for joining us. How are you? Just tell us the general, how's life?
Well, it beats the alternative as far as I can tell.
That's right.
All things are good. I'm delighted to see you and see John. And certainly John's participation in The Guilty was one of the big reasons I wanted to be part of it. And then going into my little closet to record it, I realized, as John was saying, how odd. We were all in these little boxes of various sizes scattered across the country. And it was kind of exciting because it was during the pandemic. And you had no idea how long it was going to last. And you were kind of I was kind of like reacquainted with the power of it for us in all of these various places to be telling this story and then wondering, well, wow, I wonder if we're going to be doing a lot more of this. Or is there still a place for this kind of old-timey thing? And to my great delight, John, I listened to every bit of it.
Yeah.
You were wonderful. I really enjoyed the I managed to actually, I practically lost my voice just before I recorded this. I don't know how I managed to do that during a pandemic, but I think I was hanging out with cats inadvertently and I got very allergic. So I was a little froggy, but I was listening to it and just, I was struck with how much Patterson must love the theater and love that, as you were saying, that memory, that fantasy of the people who are really crazy about the theater. There's an element, there's something about the theater that's common with our show that they can identify. It's that kind of, from that era, as John was describing, where the divas were divas and everyone was scared, and thrilled.
There is like I'm telling you, it does feel like you are almost in a time traveling back to a different era when you're listening to this, but in the most fun way. And it really does blow my mind that the two of you were not near each other when recording it, because it works together so seamlessly when you're listening to it that it's crazy, the magic of editing, isn't it? It's wild.
And also all the Foley, I don't know if they call them Foley artists in radio, but the editing, I mean, really hats off to the director and the entire crew for making. I was dreading having to listen to 3 hours of something I was in. It's not something I really generally rush at doing. But then I didn't want to have a complete omelet on my face when it came time to talk about it. And I was thrilled. I mean, I was just drawn right into the world of it. And so I was very happy to be part of it.
Yes,
Much
it's
like
true.
go on.
I do remember reading it and wondering, wow, the big challenge here is just keeping everything straight, because it goes back and forth from the two locations, but also back and forth in time. Actually, there are two or three different time periods. And I thought, how are they going to do that? Well, in fact, Peter and I, the parts we play are in the past tense, and the parts that Danny and Marcia, Stephanie Blake play are in the present tense. And they do that by playing this. They sort of roll back the tape recorder every time they go back to the flashback, and suddenly it's the echoey sound of inside a theater, and it becomes very clear. It's almost a visual effect, but it's completely audio, and it makes it so easy to follow the story. And the story is not easy to follow.
No, but it makes sense. I'm telling you, as you're listening, as I mentioned earlier, the twists and the turns all feel very organic and very, honestly, shocking. And Peter, just like I raved about Shrek to John, I have to tell you, the other formative pop culture moment of my life was your performance in Guys and Dolls. I mean, the only Sky Masterson I acknowledge in my home, so you know. Apologies to the Brando estate, but you really were just phenomenal in it. And now your daughter is also a Broadway star in Jagged Little Pill. So I want to ask you, your background in theater, how much of that, and obviously your love of theater, just like John, how much of that did you bring to this performance, which is arguably, I really feel like you're listening to a live Broadway show as you're listening to it?
Well, I think, for both of us, I know I've done probably a couple thousand performances on Broadway. John, you've probably done twice as many. And so I feel very close to John, regardless of how he feels, because we kind of arrived in the 70s maybe you were a few years earlier than I, and we were part of that world of the New York actor that we could be very proud of. But John, for me, embodied, that sense of humor and the capacity to go beyond the theater and do other things and come back to the theater. And like the other great artists I've worked with, I always felt that he was in on the joke. There was no sense that, yes, I've achieved this, and therefore I really am better than you and you and you and you. It's more like, aren't we lucky? Oh my gosh, look what we're getting away with today. And that to me is it's fuel. It's just that delight that you identified is what I think you hear in our voices, because I'm sure it's true with you. When I was reading this, I'm smelling the backstage. I'm feeling the iron stairs in between going up and down I know the wings. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law told me something very interesting, and I think this might be true. Do you know the expression break a leg?
Yes.
The leg? Well, I always thought bended knee or whatever it was. And I asked my mother-in-law, who danced at Billy Rose's Diamond Horseshoe and the Latin Quarter and Radio City Ballet Corps, what does break a leg? Well, break a leg. You didn't get paid in vaudeville unless you stepped on stage. And you know those curtains shielding the stage from the wings? They're called legs. So you got to break the leg in order to step on stage and get paid.
That's hysterical.
You learn something every day.
That might be true. The other one, good one I heard from some English guys on a film crew was It's a Wrap, Wind, Reel, and Print.
Wow.
Oh my God. Now that's another one. Boy, this is a big day for me. What date is this?
Every day.
November 18th, John Lithgow. Peter Gallagher is a wealth of info. Yes, go on.
No, I just know two things. That's it.
Was that a question for Peter? I don't want to horn in.
No, please. It's a question for both of you, of course.
What was the question?
Well, that's a good point. No, I was talking about your background in theater, and also the
Oh, right.
difference here where you're
Daughter,
recording it.
answer about the daughter, right? I should answer that at some point.
No, that's all right. But
But yes,
even doing this, do you miss like a live audience? I imagine that the pandemic for both of you has been, obviously for any actor, extremely troubling because, there weren't that many gigs like there used to be. Now it's sort of getting back to normal. But John, do you think you'll get back on a Broadway stage soon? Is that something in the works? I would love to see that.
I've been talking. There might be something, at least within the year. These things, you have to sort of plan them in advance. Needless to say, but there is one thing that's got me kind of excited that may happen, but it may not. As far as keeping ourselves occupied during the pandemic, along came The Guilty, along with 3 or 4 other audio things. I recorded a book for Audible, an Amor Towles book, the Di Domenico Fragment, and 3 or 4 other things. And I wrote 2 books. I wrote 2 of my 3 best-selling political satire books that have all come. 2 of them came out during the pandemic. In fact, I have one of them. I'm not, lest a moment pass. This is the most recent one that just hit the New York Times bestseller list 2 weeks ago.
Congratulations, A Confederacy of Dumpties.
That's right. So that I didn't let the grass grow under my feet, and I couldn't have done any of that unless there had been a pandemic. So that's a pretty feeble silver lining, but there you have it.
It's what we call a humble brag, but coming from you, it feels nice. Like I'm not jealous. Peter, how many novels did you write during the pandemic? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I can't even count. I can't even. I'm just hoping if I can't find John's book, if he'll just fax it to me.
Yes,
because from that thing, forget it.
Out of me, that's not a printer, it's a fax machine. I blame my wife. She is a historian after all. And
that must be fun. That's hysterical.
Michelle, you didn't ask about this, but I have to say it. Peter and I worked together, sadly, only once. We acted together in a movie which I guarantee you did not see, and we're not going to tell you the title lest you do. But it was the most fun I have ever had with another actor. You know him in many modes. I know him as the zaniest, most delightful, funny man. And I was so thrilled when they cast him in On the 20th Century on Broadway. So, like a theater audience could finally see just how mad this man is. This is why I was so happy to see him today. And why I was so sad not to see him while we were actually acting together. We have long scenes. We have this complicated, prickly relationship that would have been so much fun to act. And, I was talking to some woman in Chicago on Zoom the whole time.
I couldn't have done better.
Where is she today? Something that plays, by the way, watching your relationship right now, I do feel like I just want to sit here and watch you guys chat. It's just the most fun for me. I feel very blessed. Cornish Game hens, are we a fan? They play a big part in The Guilty. I'm not a fan. No one cares. But John Lithgow, Peter Gallagher, yay or nay on the Cornish Game hen?
I've had a fine Cornish game hen in my day. I've never roasted one. That was, but I am an actor after all.
Very true. Great answer, Peter Gallagher. Yay or nay, Cornish game hens?
I wouldn't go out of my way for a Cornish game hen, but it would seem cruel. It's like not quite a chicken and not quite a pigeon. But I'm sure they're delightful. John,
too many bones.
John is far more worldly than I. He's seen things I haven't seen. That's why I love talking to him. He's going to tell me all about his game hen experience.
I want to hear about the things that you've seen, John Lithgow, the worldly things that Peter Gallagher is referring to. Give us a taste.
The worldly things I have seen? You reach my age, which is considerably older than Peter's, and you've had a reasonably active acting career, and you have done the most unusual, crazy things in the wildest places. I mean, most recently, I was in northeastern Oklahoma doing 2 weeks of work on a Marty Scorsese film, a little more humble bragging, and
Oh,
and sort of plunging myself into the world of the Midwest at this very interesting time in our lives when there's such a difference between the two coasts and the Midwest, and doing a film on an extraordinary subject about an appalling historical moment in our history in the early 1920s, based on that book from a few years ago, The Killers of the Flower Moon, about what happened to the Osage Nation of Native Americans in the early 1920s at exactly the moment of the Tulsa Massacre, only about 30 miles away. Two kind of buried and appalling moments of American history. Uh, well, that's a pretty good and very kind of dark example of recent stuff I've in my history.
yes. I was really hoping you'd bring up Marty Scorsese so that I could talk about Peter Gallagher's eyebrows. See, you actually helped me do my job because they're the only two sets of eyebrows, again, that my home acknowledges, Peter. I'm just letting you know.
Well, it's a big world. It's big enough for
Yes.
for more than four eyebrows.
You know,
that's for sure.
I've often put Peter in Marty Scorsese's company
Oh.
for all sorts of reasons.
I'm looking forward to the next occasion.
Yes.
You
let
know,
me ask. Oh, sorry, Peter. Go.
Cello Mastriani, I think it was, who said that being an actor in film, if I don't screw this up, it's like what John was describing as being a luxury tourist. You know, if you're shooting at the Eiffel Tower, chances are you might end up having lunch with the guy who cuts the grass.
Yes,
and you'll talk to that guy who cuts the grass, and you're going to find out the most remarkable things because people will be willing to share them with you. You're in this environment, just like when you're in northeastern Oklahoma, experiencing that kind of powerful, confluence of the past and the present. And it is like being a luxury tourist. I found myself, I found myself doing a silent movie for Peter Sellers and improvising a dance with Mikhail Baryshnikov, and all the while thinking, I love my job. I have absolutely no qualifications for this. There is nothing about my experience that should entitle me to this experience, but somehow it's one of the big perks. You get to see humanity in a lot of different ways, and it's what I love about it too. And to answer your question about my daughter, yes, she's on Broadway. She got a nomination and a Grammy for this year for Jagged Little Pill. And I don't know if the last thing we talked about when the kids were growing up was me or the things I do. We tried to let them, as a friend of mine said, stand back and be surprised. My son's a filmmaker. My daughter is an actress and a singer, and they constantly surprise me. So I guess I had something to do with it, but they're way better than I am. So that's to answer that question. I didn't want to not answer that question you asked me.
Now, listen, I think talent is genetic. John, I don't know. It's passed down. So 100% this is what they were born to do.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, I now have, my older son is a third generation actor. I owe everything to my dad, I grew up sort of, I did 20 Shakespeare plays before I was 20 years old. Never played a big part, but at least I know the plots by now. And I don't know, show business is, it's a gift. If you're successful at it, if you make a living at it, it is such a privilege. And you have to sort of restrain yourself from gloating about how lucky you are and what an interesting life. And the great riches that you accumulate over many, many decades, it's now been 4 or 5 decades for me, is the people you've worked with.
Yeah,
if you go way back to when I was first starting out, I got to work with the likes of Jason Robards and Colleen Dewhurst, and just remarkable people. There was a fabulous moment when I was rehearsing a play directed by Mike Nichols, And in an adjoining rehearsal room, George C. Scott was rehearsing for Sly Fox. And on a little pee break, I stood at the middle of 3 urinals in the men's room with Mike Nichols on my left and George C. Scott on my right. And on that occasion, Mike Nichols introduced me to George C. Scott. Now, top that, Peter.
Did you? I really hope you said "Great Scott" at the urinal. That would have been the perfect line.
There was no handshakes involved, I might add.
Oh my God, Peter! Any urinal meetings before we wrap this once in a lifetime interview?
No, but I had the good fortune of working with Mike Nichols and George Scott, and I had that, and Jason and Colleen. When I went when I was doing it, I had done a Long Day's Journey with Jason and Colleen for an event, and Jason and I were doing a TV movie in Central California coast, and with Elaine Stritch and a bunch of other people, and the weekend was coming. He said, "Hey kid, you want to go up to Dow House in San Francisco and see where O'Neill wrote the play?" I said, "Sure." So Jason and I had a road trip. We drove all the way up to San Francisco to see where Eugene O'Neill wrote Long Day's Journey and Tonight. And I just found the pictures not long ago, actually, in my barn, right near where I recorded that. And what John is talking about is true. It's sort of like defined my experience too, and that I worked with Cagney, James Cagney, and worked with, and to have that, and Jack Lemmon, was like a father to me. To have that connection with the guys from that generation was just, I did not have, the most supportive relationship with my dad. He was a great guy and so on, but he didn't talk much. And so I was very lucky to have guys like that in my life that kind of show me the way or trying to explain things to me that my dad was unable to. And so it was really, it was a very, very special time. And it was really focused at that time in the theater. Because the one thing about the theater in the 70s, boy, were they happy to see us, because there were theaters that were dark, because it was a bad neighborhood. And we were all sort of inheriting what I felt was this passing on. And then, of course, AIDS came along and changed everything and wiped everything out. But it's rebirthed again. So I feel, as you do, a member of the Effin' Lucky Club when it comes to being able to do what we love. And
you son of a, you've just completely eclipsed my urinal story. That was my best story.
I didn't mean to pick on your story. Sorry.
Gee, James Cagney, Elaine Stritch. All right, I have worked with Elaine Stritch.
I was deaf. All those names you were dropping there earlier.
Peter, if you don't change your Twitter bio to "you son of a bitch, you ruined my urinal story," I don't know what we're doing here. Okay, what are we doing?
That is the name of my book. As a matter of fact, the one that I'm just
one of the many books that you're writing, obviously. Oh my God. I need the two of you to take this on the road somehow. The Trip, that movie. I just want to see John Lithgow, Peter Gallagher in Greece, having wine and just talking about your careers. It is so wonderful to hear your stories and chat with you.
I've been waiting to work with Peter again all these years. He truly is one of my favorite actors. We had such a great time, and we can't. Of course, we can't brag about the thing we were doing.
No, we can't. Movie with the unfortunate title.
Okay, I'll be Googling it the second this is over.
No,
you'll have to work hard. Get on IMDb and you might track it down.
100%. I'm going first to Rotten Tomatoes and then IMDb. And then I'm telling you, I have a whole plan when this is over with. Well, listen,
Rotten Tomatoes wouldn't touch it.
One of the few splats, 0% in your careers. Well, listen, I have to tell you that just chatting with you guys was, for me, one of truly the highlights of my career. I adore both of you. You're both so brilliant and so intelligent and funny and lovely. And you bring all of the wonderfulness that we just experienced right now to this Audible show, The Guilty. And I just want to say congratulations. And it's such a wonderful performance from both of you. So thank you so much for joining me today and everyone watching.